Gym culture can be separated into many subgroups. For example, there's the group that trains for health and longevity. Then there's the group that's motivated by aesthetics, like the gym bros who train tirelessly to make their physique a symbol to the masculine ideal. And lastly, you have the other group, my group, which is indifferent towards health and holds disdain for aesthetics. These are the performers, and this group only lifts to improve their numbers, be it for sport, for ego, or just for the sake of it. Included in this group are the layperson who wants to be more useful in their day-to-day life and who likes being the strong guy at work. It includes professional lifters who are chasing GOAT status at the Olympics, on television, or in powerlifting's case on IG Reels. It includes career athletes who stand to make millions if they can set themselves apart from the competition. And it includes amateur athletes who would spend millions for a plastic trophy. Now that last group is my people and the focus of this channel. If you have big dreams and bad genes, you're in the right place, gather round. Of all of the differences between these tribes that populate the land of iron, there is no more divisive a chasm, no more polarizing a spectrum than the one that separates natty lifter from enhanced. Steroid use is a topic that has absolutely consumed internet lifting culture, resulting in an endless sideshow of genetically modified mutants selling supplements under the pretense that they're drug-free. Endless natty or not vids, which provide meaningless speculation on who's using and who isn't. And numerous impassioned pleas in the comments from frustrated low-level lifters who insist that steroid users just admit they have it easier. It really is a shit show, and this divisive discourse is so effective at pitting bro against bro that it can only be a narrative created by some elite class of billionaires who want to distract us from the real enemy, the non-lifting globalists. Now, the uselessness of natty or not videos aside, there are some key differences between all natural and pharmaceutically enhanced lifters that needs to be addressed, and these questions deserve an honest and serious take, which I promise I'm getting to. In this video, we are going to discuss the difficult topic of PED use and get to the bottom of exactly how they affect your training. We're going to approach this from the perspective of both sides, the dedicated noble natties who just want their results to be a monument to their hard work, and those who would pray to Santa Muerta if it would turn them into a monster truck. And hopefully this video serves as a much needed resource for natty lifters and how they should approach their training so that they can actually get back to their otherwise fully natural and organic existence.
Oh, that's go away, Baton!
Like God intended.
And one, they don't know why they're doing it. Today, if you were to go to the store and buy a gym package, like if there was just, I want to be a gym guy today, and you could go purchase that on the store, it'd come with a gym membership, a certain brand of clothes, and a package of PEDs. Like that's what you need. For some reason today, that's what it takes to go to the gym. The difference between what we did, or at least myself and the guys that I grew up with, and what I see today in the variation of gear, there were years of training, prior to jumping on something. It was just the enjoyment of training.
Now, most lifters are highly aware of the existence of steroids, but very few understand how common they actually are. For the longest time, the public discussion was centered around athletes performing at the highest levels, in the NFL, at the MLB, at the Olympics. Many sports fans clung to the idea that PEDs were not widely used at these levels, and the problem was framed as a few bad apples ruining the curve for all the other honest players. Even in bodybuilding, powerlifting, and strongman, where the fact of rampant use is more widely known and accepted, fans of the sport will often concede that the top guys are on, while denying that the competitors in their inner circle or their favorite lifters on their IG feed would ever consider doing such a thing. If you start with the assumption that PED use is both rare and egregious, it's easy to paint the common user as being no better than a Dick Dastardly who only gets ahead by taking shortcuts and setting traps for the other wacky racers. And our guys don't do that. That's the other guys over there. Many people will force their worldview through that narrow funnel because it's easier, it's safer. You don't have to deal with any moral gray area, but it's important to get a real honest representation of the culture of steroid use because it's that culture that provides the biggest influence to what any one lifter does. It's more impactful than simply the desire to get ahead. People are often willing to cheat, yes, but rarely in such an egregious way that they risk being ostracized from the group that they are so closely attached to. For example, we all know about Lance Armstrong's fall from grace, but much less coverage was given to the dozens of cyclists around him who also popped in that investigation. If there was no system, no culture already established, if they were in complete isolation, how many of them would have taken that step? The reality is that wherever steroids are present, there is a culture around it. The documentary Icarus, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, chronicled the director of the Moscow Anti-Doping Center, Grigory Rodchenkov, as he blew the whistle on the massive corruption that existed in Russia's state-sponsored doping program. The actual Russian government was responsible for breaking into test samples and swapping urine on behalf of their athletes in order to beat WADA testing. Doping wasn't just tolerated, it was required. It was a way of life. And this comes from the nation that was responsible for so many of the studies and texts that exercise science as a field still leans on today. Now, this is something that was done just for Olympic representation, which happens once every 4 years. Consider other sports that have a season every year and bring in billions of dollars in revenue. Some sports are better at controlling for it than others, but wherever the incentive exists, the culture will spawn. But what does this matter? This is a video about how natural lifters should train. Who cares? This is highly relevant because how you train in the future will depend entirely on which sources you choose to be influenced by. So understanding the ins and outs of this culture and how prevalent it is crucial context that's required for making educated decisions in the future. If you are basing those decisions off of a wrong or incomplete view of what goes on in the field, you will miss vital pieces of information and, more tragically, leave gains on the table. Steroid use is extremely prevalent, that's a fact, and it has been for half a century or more. The textbooks that are still used today were written by enhanced lifters using studies from enhanced populations. The most popular books and programs, the most innovative exercise modifications, the approaches to training that are successfully used by lifters, enhanced and otherwise all over the world, were created largely by non-natties. Now here's the important part. You might hear all of this and be inclined to think that all of the information we have is invalid. The crop has been stricken with corruption and we must burn it to the ground to start anew. And you would be wrong. The appropriate conclusion isn't that all the work is tainted by drug users, so it's useless. It's that all those responsible for these publications, these innovations, had a career that is defined by their work with countless athletes across all experience and talent barriers. So to answer the question of should you listen to sources that use PEDs, the correct answer is I don't know, have they coached? If you are in the habit of restricting your online intake to information that is only taken from steroid-free sources, not only will you not be left with very much information, but you might be making the mistake that so many of us have done at some point in the past, which is thinking that the personal experience of successful lifters we look up to is an adequate resource and that it can inform your own training decisions. It isn't, and it can't. There are plenty of people who are bad sources of information online with desirable physiques and strength levels because chemicals played a role. Yeah, that's absolutely true, and you should be wary of them. But the same is true with the genetically gifted outliers, who will no doubt be represented on any list of natty lifters I want to look like. So I don't care in the slightest what the 19-year-old Chris Bumstead lookalike did to get that way, whether he's just a natural freak or if he's drowning in trend suspension. His personal training methods aren't relevant, at least not in isolation. What I do care about is if those methods were applied to a wider group of people and shown over time to be effective. That's how we come to a consensus, and that's how we get the best idea of what will probably work for us. 19-year-olds don't have that insight, period. And neither do most of your favorite online jacked guys. What separates the highly advanced ding-dongs that spread bad info on TikTok from the sources you should listen to is not whether or not they take drugs, just like it's not whether or not they won a world championship. It's whether they are students of the discipline and have clocked the minimum acceptable number of hours sharpening their skill set against a very diverse population of lifters, enhanced and otherwise. Long story short, the culture of gear is everywhere. You can't escape it. So make sure that the jacked freaks on your feed are there for entertainment purposes only, and restrict your training influence to that which comes from established coaches. If you do that, you can't go wrong. On the topic of natural training, I'd like to turn your attention to Mr. Alberto Nunez. He's a highly accomplished coach and lifter. He's done collaborations with Jeff Nippard, and oh, did I mention he's Mr. Natural Universe? He is a wealth of information, and I highly recommend you check him out on 3DMJ, which is the channel he was featured on YouTube. Well, Alberto here has an absolutely free new hypertrophy program that is available exclusively on the Boostcamp app. For those of you who don't know, Boostcamp is an extremely easy and intuitive to use application. You just punch in your numbers and you go. Alberto's natural size program, in addition to having 4 variations depending on your weaknesses, offers a full exercise video library. As a natural bodybuilder, Alberto takes his exercise execution extremely seriously and expects you to do as well. Now, I've covered many of the free programs on Boostcamp, including 531, GZCL, and my program Bull Mastiff. I will be doing many more reviews in the future, as Boost Camp is also home to many unique programs from highly accomplished coaches that you just won't find anywhere else. So if you haven't already, download Boost Camp today, as it is by far the most helpful training tool that you can put on your phone, and it is absolutely free. Another big question that many lifters have is the degree to which steroids are effective. Many on the outside of steroid culture make the mistake of attributing most, if not all, success that a PED user makes to the drugs, while drug users also have an incentive to pretend as if the drug does nothing. They'll typically appeal to hard work and discipline and say something to the effect of, "A needle doesn't lift the weight, bro." Right, you deal with the trend cough, insomnia, and violent ideation because you like the wellness benefits. But those who actually coach, train, and compete out there in the sea of PED users that exist know that both of those scenarios are pretty far from the truth. Let's start with muscle gain. A commonly cited study from the New England Journal of Medicine showed some shocking results as they divided 40 men into 4 groups: training and no training, gear and no gear. The result was that the group that took testosterone but didn't train gained 7 pounds on average, compared to the 4 gained by the natty group that actually did train.
The group that took test and did not exercise still gained 7 pounds of muscle. The people who took the placebo, so they were still natural, and exercised only gained 4 pounds.
See? Drug users can sit on their ass and still grow more than natties.
Validate our struggle.
Not so fast there, Skipper.
So based on this study, if you don't know what you're talking about, you're going to be like, yeah, you don't need to go to the gym. You can just take tests and you'll put on 7 pounds of muscle because the study proves it. But it proves a zero.
What's often left out is that the results from the non-training drug group were not deemed statistically significant. Most studies will include a p-value, which is a complex calculation to show how likely an observed difference in a study is to have happened from chance alone. And values of 0.05 or less are typically the threshold used to determine if this difference is seen as statistically significant. Here, values over that threshold were left out. Essentially, it's weak evidence that the observed difference wasn't just due to chance. What's also not mentioned is that 7 pounds of muscle gain is absolutely huge, but 7 pounds of weight gain really isn't.
So when you gain 8 pounds, it's not 8 pounds of muscle. If you gain 4 pounds, it's not 4 pounds of muscle. It's maybe half. Test bloats you.
As the muscles fill up on glycogen and thus water, it makes all of your muscles swell in a very short period of time, even the ones in your face. Of course, tissue is likely gained here, but much of the weight gain observed was very likely water retention that the placebo group did not experience because they were not taking a compound that causes that effect.
The way that a cow does.
Now, as much as we would like to have thousands of volunteers follow closely for decades to observe these differences under the scrutiny of credentialed scientists, we don't have that capability and probably never will. We're much more likely to find a reasonable ballpark through professionals in the field who do hold degrees, but who have also been around the block a few times. What we need is science on the streets, bro in the sheets. So let's defer to everybody's favorite Russian PhD holding bodybuilder, Dr. Mike Israetel.
For 10 years of dedicated training and dieting drug-free, on the average side of things, you may be looking at about 30. And on the above average side, you may be looking at about 45 pounds of muscle over 10 years. Okay, some people gain close to nothing when they lift weights for years and they just stop, rightfully so, because what the fuck. Some rare folks, they can gain something like 70 pounds of total muscle, completely drug-free, in the first 10 years of their training. What if you start doing drugs not after 10 years of natty training? What if you start getting into that dirty business after year 3 or 5 or whatever? There's a huge variance with drug responses. Some people use drugs for 3 months and they just like burn 5 pounds of fat and add 5 pounds of muscle. And they're like, what the fuck? No side effects to be seen. Some people will use drugs for 3 months and just basically get flu-like symptoms every time they shoot. And then nothing happens and they get just really pissed. Numerous natties from this example, okay, will be as big or bigger than full-bore users. Remember, we've got guys on the outcomes, the shitty outcomes here, at 160 pounds at 5'9" at 38 years old. They may run into someone with average outcomes who's 160 and 5'9" at 28 years old and has never touched a fucking drug. You know, in an average gym, you don't know who's on steroids because most of the people on them, you can't even fucking tell. That's the reality. And again, that's not me telling you, steroids don't fucking work, man. Don't take them. They work fucking great for some people.
So all over the world, there are millions of people who are recreationally using large amounts of drugs who experience gains that absolutely pale in comparison to what the average natural trainee will accomplish within a few years of dedicated training. Individual variance cannot be understated, and that is the main case against the fatalistic, black-pilled natty community that believes the limits of natural human achievement is to just look like a suitless earthworm Jim, and that anyone with a lump on their delt must be on gear. On the topic of strength, let's check in with our other patron saint of evidence-based gains, Greg Nuckols, who does the Lord's work by making real-world sense out of flimsy exercise science studies. Greg conducted a meta-study that measured the difference between records in tested and untested powerlifting federations. I know, we just went over cultures of cheating and state-sponsored doping programs. Powerlifters are the last people that we should believe. You're not entirely wrong, but American natty gym culture is not to be underestimated.
You may think yourself clever and go, hold on, Dr. Mike, and by proxy, Greg Nuckols. Everyone in these tested federations is cheating because they are stronger than me and have to be cheating. And thus, it's all bullshit. So, yeah, you might have some point. There are certainly some cheating going on in natural feds. But if you've been around powerlifting, especially in the United States, you know that cheating is just not rampant in drug-tested powerlifting. A lot of them are like wacky, no offense, like super anti-drug, irrationally anti-drug people that think like vitamins are cheating and shit like that.
If you've ever gone to a typical untested powerlifting meet, or God help you stumbled into a multiply meet, you can feel the difference in the air between that and a tested federation. One smells like pyrotechnic smoke and Tren-infused hot dog sweat, and the other smells like sanitized hotel conference rooms that you would hold a math league at.
They're the same picture.
It really is the difference between professional wrestling and golf. Now, some cheating is to be expected, but natty powerlifting, like American weightlifting, really is thought by those on the inside to be one of the cleaner sports. Now, the results of this study showed roughly 10% difference between the highest tested numbers, which are likely to be scrutinized the closest, and the highest untested numbers.
So I don't think, my personal opinion, you may disagree with it, that cheating is a really big problem and in a huge way alters these numbers. However, we'll say, okay, 10% is too low, fine is 12%. 12%. It's not 50%. Drugs don't make you 50% stronger. It's not even 25%. Let's say it's half that still, 12%.
To add a little bit of anecdote to this, over 7 years of drug use, I went through rapid bouts where my strength would increase dramatically, followed by long bouts of stagnation and sometimes regression. It was often caused by injuries or overuse issues caused by the drugs or by having to come off altogether. But after all of my time on, if I were to chart my best numbers with the gear and my best numbers during the 15 years prior, we're looking at a difference of about 100 pounds on my deadlift, about 70 pounds on my overhead, and about 80 pounds on my squat. So if we assume that the gear is responsible for 100% of the difference, meaning I wouldn't have gained a pound of strength on any of my lifts in that time, we're looking at about a 15% difference over 7 years. Is that substantial? Absolutely. But is that going to be the difference between you being a mediocre Smith machine bencher and the next guy chasing Julius Maddox? No, it likely won't even get you out of novice territory so you can be competitive with the other guys at Planet Fitness. Once again, substantial, but not everything.
Okay, Kai Green was like 210 pounds at 5'7" natural. I believe it. Ronnie Coleman, he was like 5'11". I think he was like 215 on stage, drug-free. If people say, oh, that's bullshit, I don't believe it. Well, he was fucking 287 after all the drugs. Is it really that hard to imagine? So genetics is a motherfucker, and drugs don't make up the entire gap. Huge thing to remember. So a lot of stupid-ass comments on various forums, YouTube included, unfortunately, is like, man, if I took the gear he's taking, I'd be a fucking pro. Yeah, you probably wouldn't, though. You almost certainly wouldn't. Sometimes you would, but it's unlikely, so take that shit straight the fuck to the garbage. The pros are special. They are. And not because they're super sharp. Usually they're not. Not because they're doing all the right stuff. A lot of times they're not. But mostly due to genetics and consistency. And you may not have both of those things.
The important thing to understand is that your body is always searching for homeostasis. Somebody who takes 500 milligrams of testosterone and sees a quick bit of growth over a few months is not going to see that same amount of growth indefinitely for as long as they are taking that 500 milligrams of testosterone. In fact, diminished returns will set in until the body reestablishes homeostasis, and the same amount of continued drug use leads to no further adaptation. At this point, just as with natural athletes, Your continued progression must come from expert handling of your training or by upping the dose. And to drive that point home, just consider all of the world-class strongmen and strength athletes who live and breathe their sport, who have gone through periods of stagnation while being on copious amounts of drugs and training their asses off while eating everything in sight. If the drugs worked the way that many people claim they do, as far as being a straight shot to elite numbers and requiring very little work, then all of the dedicated athletes eating and training their asses off would surely continue to see growth for as long as they were training and using. But they don't. The fact is that athletes on steroids are not exempt from training plateaus.
It's like your ACE card, okay? If you're an athlete, you got one ACE card to play. When are you gonna play it? All right, if you have to play that ACE card to make your high school football team, you're probably not gonna play in college. If you're gonna be a pro for 5 years in the NFL, and then you flip it to pull another 5 years, now you're making another $10, $15 million.
All right, here's the crash course in organic chemistry you didn't know you wanted. Regular old chemistry concerns itself with how all of these cool elements interact with each other. It's everything from everyday metals to toxic gases to radioactive compounds. Organic chemistry refers specifically to hydrocarbons, which makes everything, be alive. Hydrocarbons are capillary structures that are made out of a carbon backbone. Remember, we are all carbon-based life forms, and whittle hydrogen legs that branch off. They can form themselves in a crazy number of ways, and they can interact with other elements to make every structure in our body, including our hormones. Now, steroids refer to anything with this chemical structure. It's foundationally 3 hexagons with 1 pentagon. These are carbon backbones with hydrogens hanging off the corners, and they will hold different functional groups that change what they do. So steroids include the typical anabolic androgenic steroids that we refer to as PEDs, along with things like corticosteroids that will absolutely not get you jacked. Trust me, I've tried. And it even includes estrogen. You know how guys go on their first cycle only to get lumps under their nipples like Secret Squirrel was storing acorns for the winter? That's because testosterone and many other anabolic androgenic steroids convert to estrogen, and estrogen forms breast tissue. Anabolic androgenic steroids act on androgen receptors, which are located within the cells of tissue all over the body. These receptors exist in muscle tissue, in skin cells, in reproductive tissue, and even in your brain, which explains a lot of the rapid mood and behavioral changes that steroid users experience, along with the really rapid increases in strength. Remember, peak strength isn't just obtained by carrying more muscle, although that's part of it. It requires a nervous system that makes as much use of the muscle you do have as possible by recruiting more motor units at once and doing so in a shorter period of time. The action of hormones on the brain increases aggression and overrides the body's governor that normally keeps tendons attached to bones and muscles unexploded. In muscle cells, the hormone breaks through the cell wall, binds to the receptor, and triggers a response for the cell to start pumping out new muscle tissue the way the Fed prints money. What type of supplement are you looking for, sir? The one that causes inflation. This is one of the biggest concerns with PED use and your training. It's the rapid increase in muscle size and strength, and the fact that it puts more strain on tendons that are now repairing at a slower rate. So things tend to start ripping apart. Now, since PEDs put the muscle-making factory into hyperdrive, there doesn't have to be as much work or effort done in a workout to spark growth. Now, this doesn't mean that the average PED user can get jacked as shit by dicking around in their workouts. If you can phone it in and still get big, congratulations. You have the holy grail of meathead genetics. But it does mean that some approaches that avoid training to failure and don't accumulate a lot of total volume might still give a pretty good result, where it might not have if that individual was not enhanced. Now, frequency also doesn't have to be as high, since the production of tissue continues for much longer after the initial training stress. So where Natty Nate will be fully recovered a few days after his workout and will begin to detrain shortly after that, Saucy Chauncey will continue to grow for the full 7 days of his old school 1 time per week body part split.
If somebody is using steroids, protein synthesis is elevated 24/7 for the whole week. So it's always in muscle building mode. For a natural athlete, it won't really work because after a training session, protein synthesis is elevated for 24 to 36 hours in the muscle that was trained. So if I only train a muscle once a week, I'm basically building muscle only for a day and a half. Compare that to the 7 days for somebody who's enhanced. So if the natural trainee trains each muscle only once a week, he cannot expect maximum or even rapid muscle growth.
Now, this difference is one of the reasons that 2 times per week training is often prescribed as the minimum frequency for natural lifters. On top of that, the stress doesn't even have to be that specific to get a good result. I'm reminded of Leroy Walker, who got near a 700-pound raw bench by doing 5x15 workouts and prioritizing fucking incline bench. Many bodybuilders got big as a house by doing a lot of light, high-rep pump work that is well outside of what is normally considered optimal hypertrophy thresholds. Remember, kids, this is why we don't just copy the workouts of our favorite lifters. The hyperproduction of protein that steroids cause makes the enhanced lifter bounce back from hard workouts much faster than he otherwise would have. So while they have the option to do less and grow, they also have the option to do more and grow.
Essentially, taking the drugs lowered their minimum effective volume to 0. So the drugs spread those points out further. They move your ability to recover and train up, and they reduce the amount of training you have to do to make progress.
This is why the Soviets referred to PEDs in a somewhat tongue-in-cheek manner as restoratives. Steroid use was a vital piece of the pie that allowed such brutal approaches to training as the Bulgarian method to be successful. So you might hear about some of the crazy success from really, really brutal methods of training and think that the best way to go about when you're on the sauce is to just do all the work. Dive into the deep end, the gear will keep you afloat. However, recovery isn't just how quickly your muscle tissue repairs itself from a strenuous workout. It's also how well your joints and connective tissue recover. Those structures weaken precisely at the time where they are expected to do the most work, when the steroids are increasing strength rapidly. So if you consider all of the Bulgarian weightlifters who were selected for their genetic eliteness and who were juiced to the fucking gills, many of them got chewed up by the system that was supposed to turn them into a world champion. So we can assume that those who survived the max 3 times a day approach likely had some genetic predisposition to being durable that the average person doesn't have, many elite performers don't have, and that steroids certainly won't give you. And this is again the reason why we always go back to genes being a motherfucker. So to answer the question, do steroids improve recovery? Yes, but also no. Bottom line is that they allow you to respond to a wide variety of approaches, so you can decide to prioritize really hard fucking work and live in the gym for 3 hours, or you can just do a token top set and let the restoratives do the rest. Whatever approach you choose, it still has to be balanced with your individual ability to tolerate stress and the minimum amount of work that you actually need to grow. It's the people that are desperate to be elite right fucking now who dive into a reckless drug protocol, ignore their personal limitations, and have their muscles and connective tissue rip apart as a result. So you can assume that you as a natty have a much more narrow band to operate in with regards to your training compared to your pharmaceutically enhanced counterpart. So assuming your genes are just whatever and you aren't bathing in excess calories, because being strong is much easier if you're okay being really fucking fat, you will likely have to do more work, but will still have to cap the work you do based on your own recovery ability. i.e., probably don't train a muscle while it's still sore. Probably don't bank on being able to do high frequency, high volume, high intensity workouts for a long time. A good philosophy to help you walk this line is to plan your training around deloads and make absolutely sure that you fucking earn them. Now the good news is that this spontaneous disappearance of quadriceps and pectorals from their insertion points doesn't seem to be a problem with the natty community. So the fact that you don't have to train under the oppressive shadow of imminent injury means that you should be able to schedule your workouts with higher difficulty and go through them a little more optimistically. And that's something that I call natty privilege. So finally, we're here. I present to you the natty checklist. So because the natural trainee is not going to be synthesizing new muscle tissue as readily or for as long after a workout, it seems that twice per week on a particular lift or body part is the minimum recommendation for effective training. I would add a caveat that once per week training can be an effective means of maintenance for body parts that you might be putting on the back burner. For instance, if your back is really strong and developed, but your arms are small and disproportionate, you might want to go through a period of increased frequency for your arms while simply maintaining the gains in your back by just paying lip service to it once a week. Maintenance is relatively easy. It's growth that's really hard. Now for strength athletes, 2 times per week frequency generally looks like an upper-lower body split. And 3 times per week or up is generally some type of blended split where upper and lower might be done on the same day. Consider this split: squat, bench, deadlift, overhead. Even in a split where you do one of the 4 main lifts each day, the same muscles are getting hit in some capacity more than once, since squatting and deadlifting use similar muscles as do benching and overhead pressing. If you're putting an effort on those workouts and you're adhering to the progression, this can be enough for natties to grow. And that's a key component of why programs like 5-3-1 or Juggernaut that follow the 4 lifts over 4 days type of upper-lower body split are productive for so many people, because they're low frequency, but also kind of not really. So also keep in mind that if one lift is perpetually lagging behind others, increasing specific frequency by doing that lift twice per week might be the fastest way to get it moving again. If 5-3-1 just isn't doing it for your overhead press, but your bench is okay, consider adding in a second overhead press in the week.
If you're natural and you don't have all the advantages, you actually do need to train very intensely, because it's harder for you to create the adaptation. You need to train really hard. You can't go in there and just goof off and do some pump sets and expect to get really big.
Boom! He just said it. We're 100% same page. So this is what I was hoping he was going to say. If you're natural, it's harder for you to grow muscle. Absolutely it is.
All things being equal, it seems that natty populations have more to gain by taking their working sets closer to failure. This extra effort creates a bigger stress, which is needed to force growth, because the same dose doesn't go quite as far as it does for your pharmaceuticalized evil twin. Your twin not only can get away without going balls to the wall on every set, it might actually be smarter for them to do so, as injury risk starts to increase with PED use and rapid strength gain. Now, this isn't quite as easy as saying, just go to failure, guys, especially with strength athletes focused on the big lifts. Every programming approach has its own way of balancing how many total sets and reps you do with how hard each set is. And how that program progresses week to week is a big piece of the pie. For instance, doing a fuck me out of 10 effort might be fine once per week, but if you have to squat 3 days later, that one YOLO set can increase risk and make it very likely that you won't be recovered for your next session. It might even sabotage the whole program. But squatting or deadlifting to an RPE 8 on a set of 10 is probably going to be a pretty substantial growth stress for any lifter, even though it's shy of failure. And in the context of high frequency, it might even make more sense. The trade-off of doing more frequency on compound lifts throughout the week is that you can't go balls to the wall on any given day, even with natty guys. So if you're trying to run a Shaco program that uses submaximal volume, don't think that because you're natural and you watch this video that you should suddenly start taking those sets to failure. You're not going to have a good time. With bodybuilding type exercises, you have more to gain by going to failure and a lot less to lose, and natty guys are going to be best suited taking advantage of that. Now, what we consider a strength or hypertrophy specific rep range doesn't really change based on the enhanced status of the athlete that's doing it, but their ability to grow from any one rep range and get it to carry over to other things does. Sets of 15, 20 and up can definitely have their place and be used strategically, but if a natural bodybuilder has their default set and rep scheme at 15 and 20 reps because that's what their favorite bodybuilder does, and if they never push below that, they're going to likely find that they develop pretty good muscular endurance and burn a lot of calories, but probably aren't going to see really dramatic gains in terms of size and strength. Now, really high rep compound movements like squat and bench are a bit of an exception. I think they are still valuable for non-enhanced athletes because they tend to take on a density component. Those reps are not done the way that reps on a machine or isolation movement are. The intermittent breaks create kind of a rest pause effect that actually make these types of movements a bit more beneficial for growth than smaller ones. And that's one of the reasons I've pushed something like super squats in the past as a productive means of breaking a plateau, getting out of a rut. But outside of these few king builder exercises that have entire training systems built around them, the smaller movements that make up the lion's share of accessory work and bodybuilding work will require more specific ranges. Natural lifters aren't going to do much better than hovering around 10 reps for growth, and they might even benefit from breaking down into 6s and 5s to trigger some strength gains that can, in turn, improve their ability to load up their 10 rep sets. Many bodybuilding protocols that have been successful for recreational and drug-free lifters have included things like pyramids and reverse pyramids, which pair low rep strength work with high rep hypertrophy work, and double progressions like the one Alberto Nunez prescribes, where you start at the heavy end of a rep range around 6 reps and stay at that weight until you can do 10. So even though you are pushing to hypertrophy ranges, you start in something that is closer to a strength range, and that tends to work out very well for those who do not have the benefit of pharmaceutical enhancement. The enhanced version of you likely has more play in the joints when it comes to your training. There are less wrong answers, you can get away with more, while the natural you has to walk a narrower path. But what that path is going to depend a lot on individual factors, including your genetics, your experience, what you're most recently adapted to, along with how well you're able to run the program in the spirit that it was made in. Now that last one is a big one. There's a lot of effed up decision making that lifters engage in that ruin the efficacy of their programs, only for them to say, well, I guess this doesn't work for me because fill in some vague excuse. Every training has a learning curve, and it's up to you to tweak it until you get the best possible result.
Is you're going to have to experiment. I can't tell you exactly how many sets you need to do. See, a lot of this is you're going to have a lot of people telling you exactly how many sets to do, but you're all very different. We all recover different. There's a lot of factors involved.
Steroids or not, you are never not on the hook for getting the right answer, and that means molding yourself to the program and paying attention to the results. A lot of this discussion is centered around the stress of the individual workout, almost like each workout is a trip to the farmer's market to buy a bushel of organic, non-GMO gains. We talk about how many sets you're doing in a workout, how many reps each set has, if you're pushing to failure, and whether or not that was enough to squeeze out a few more drops of growth. While measuring what goes on in the workout is very useful to determining how effective it is, the thing that forces your body to continuously adapt is the regular increase in stress. It goes beyond the individual workout and goes into how each workout ties into the next one. It is extremely important for natural lifters who do not grow so much from a singular stress to continue to increase the weight and increase the training stress in some capacity. No matter if you're a powerlifter who exclusively does singles, doubles, and triples, or a bodybuilder who lives and dies in double-digit reps, your programming has to feature some deliberate method of progressive overload, and that has to be more sophisticated than just go harder than last time. And for that reason, some of the oldest methods work the best. Simple linear progressions, dynamic double progressions, step progressions, wave progressions, and so on can all be applied to all of your exercises. The thing that sticks in your mind that's important about training that will lead to very long-term growth is that you stick to something long enough to get good at it. And once you know that you've gotten good at it, level up again and repeat the process. So that is the Natty Checklist, guys. I hope that this was educational. Maybe you took away some things you didn't know before. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let us know what your status is, what you were able to get away with, what worked for you that might not have worked for other people. Clue us into the process that took you to where you are now. Thanks so much for watching this, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.